Louise Perry in this book makes a tremendous effort to build the right type of framework, the good framework, from scratch. And she gets to so many great conclusions, like marriage is good, porn is bad, and many others, that, however, without any metaphysical context, remain completely suspended in the air. And this leaves her with a shell without an egg. Welcome back to Catholic Wisdom. If you're new to the channel, thank you for being here. If you're not new, you probably have seen that the background is very different here. This is because I've moved from one coast of the United States to the other. So it's been a few very interesting days. Today I would like to briefly talk about a book that I've read recently, titled The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry. Louise Perry has written for the New Statesman magazine, and she majored in women's studies. During her university years, she says that she believed that she agreed with the hookup culture, with pornography and rough sex, as long as they were among consenting adults. But then 10 years later, she completely changed her mind. She says that she's happy and grateful that the birth control pill and all the modern contraceptives have given women greater control over their lives. But she argues that it's come to a cost. She writes that modern feminism has encouraged women to feel empowered by, in inverted commas, having sex like a man. She believes that many women cannot just sever sex from emotions and a desire for committed relationships, including, of course, marriage. And she says that there's a power imbalance in today's sexual marketplace that can make women feel devalued. So overall, the book is arguing for a counter-sexual revolution. And that's why the case is against the sexual revolution, because the point is that there are many things about the sexual revolution that didn't work out. The author writes, "We should treat our sexual partners with dignity. We should not regard other people as merely body parts to be enjoyed. We should aspire to love and mutuality in all of our sexual relationships," which is great. She also quotes an essay, a very interesting essay, written by a Playboy sex columnist, which went viral, where this columnist described the exact emotional journey that Louise Perry is referring to, of having had many casual relationships and then having really convinced herself that she was the one in the driver's seat, that this was good for her, that she wasn't going to catch feelings, she said, and it was empowering, etc., etc. But later realizing the extent to which she had been lying to herself. And so Louise Perry says, women tend to get emotionally attached more easily than men, which is not to say that men don't, but men in general find emotionless sex a lot easier than women do. You very often end up in this dynamic where women are having sexual relationships with men and they're trying to suppress their emotional attachment. And we really cannot underestimate the extent to which women were slaves to their reproductive systems. That's what she is saying. And so she continues, so I think that particular aspect of the sexual revolution was actually absolutely, unambiguously a good thing. It just comes with trade-offs. And of course, you can already see here how her views differ substantially from a Christian perspective. And she continues, I'm arguing that there needs to be more of a social reckoning with where we are now, because there has been among liberals a very simplistic narrative of the sexual revolution, that it has been unambiguously to women's benefit. And I think, says Perry, there is also a converse narrative among conservatives, maybe much less dominant, that the social revolution has been an unambiguous disaster. I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. That's what she says. And aside from the fact that the truth is not necessarily always in the middle or a middle ground between any two positions, this is just pure philosophy, here is where Louise Perry misses the opportunity to reach actual depth in her truth-seeking effort. She writes, "The virtues I am promoting are Christian virtues in the end. I recognize that part of what I'm doing, and I'm aware that this is what I'm doing, is I'm making an argument for Christian virtues. But I'm making them from secular priors and to a secular audience." So there is a huge problem right there, but I'll get to it in a moment. She continues and she says, there are clearly ways in which Christian conservatism places burdens on women that it does not place on men to the same degree. For instance, the fact that Christians take historically quite an unusual view of abortion, which obviously places burdens on women in particular. The emphasis on chastity clearly places burdens on women. I'm not sure if this statement by Louise Perry about the unusual view on abortion is true. I didn't fact check it, but it sounds a little strange to me. But the point that I want to make with this video is a much broader one. Louise Perry says that she moved on from her liberal views as she matured after university. And that's a great direction, and I love her message. However, she's been influenced by the Godless Society, British society where she grew up, elitist society of Oxford and the best colleges, in a way that she doesn't seem to understand that without God as a primary source of everything, nothing can have real meaning, especially when it comes to our fundamental relationships, especially in these cases. Even her practical advice remains untethered because she has been taught by her social environment to reject and oppose what she calls the religion and tradition. The point is that Louise Perry in this book makes a tremendous effort to build the right type of framework, the good framework, from scratch. And she gets to so many great conclusions, like marriage is good, porn is bad, and many others, that, however, without any metaphysical context, remain completely suspended in the air. And this leaves her with a shell without an egg. There's no real substance. It's like somebody who throws away the instructions to build something and then tries to rebuild it from scratch without having the direct line to the manufacturer, who is the only one who can give her the key to make the product work, ultimately work. In this way, everything in the book remains at surface level, without a real anchor to the deepest hearts of men and women. And unfortunately, for the book, this is not how you can speak profoundly about men and women relationships, or about sex for that matter, because you cannot write off God from these deep fundamental matters. You just can't. For example, the concept of freedom. Louise Perry writes, sexual disenchantment is a natural consequence of the liberal privileging of freedom over any other value, because if you want to be utterly free, you have to take aim at any kind of social restriction that limits you, particularly the belief that sex has some unique intangible value. Now, in the book, Perry never really defines freedom, the word freedom. What is this freedom? In the modern culture, it's come to mean the ability to do whatever pleases me, because we live in a society of teenagers, in the West at least. While for centuries and centuries and centuries, the word freedom has meant something very, very different, which is the ability to become the best that I can, to be the best human being that I can, which means a saint, after all, without any impediments. This is what freedom means and what should mean for any adult person. Here is another interesting quote from the book. From this belief in the specialness of sex comes a host of potentially unwelcome phenomena, including patriarchal religious systems. But when we attempt to disenchant sex, then there is another kind of cost. And so if we want to paraphrase this quote, Louise Perry is saying that the sacrality the religion assigns to sex actually sounds like the right thing to do. But she says, I've been brought up in my society to think that the patriarchal religious systems are really bad, are the bad guys. So how can I reconcile these two things? And my answer, of course, as a Catholic is, there is a way to reconcile these two things. And the way to reconcile them is to look more deeply and more seriously into what faith, in fact, is and says, what Christian theology actually says, because these are not new problems at all. They have been analyzed and reflected upon and meditated and prayed upon by all the fathers of the church for the last 2,000 years. So, again, to my point, this is not a topic that can be discussed with sufficient depth without the transcendental element. As another example of misconstruing religion, Louise Perry quotes an evolutionary biologist called Sarah Bluffer-Hardy, who said, "We are not ready-made out of somebody's rib. We are composites of many different legacies, put together from leftovers in an evolutionary process, etc. And this sentence is quoted to pinpoint the alleged short-sightedness of Christianity. We're not made of somebody's rib. Come on, are you so foolish to believe this type of older ancient myths that women are made out of Adam's rib? There is evolution, there is science. Today we understand things much better. You can see that also this quote comes from a place, unfortunately, of ignorance about Catholic theology and Christian theology. Not only the Church, both the Catholic and the Anglican ones, because Perry is British, embrace evolutionary theories fully, but also huge things like, for example, the Big Bang Theory were originally formulated by Catholics, Catholic scientists or Catholic priests. Towards the end of the book, the author brings up a not very well-defined moral intuition, which in itself is problematic because, especially for somebody who claims to be writing for a secular audience, because it's again the consequence of something that you are not willing to accept. For any type of moral intuition to exist, you need to have an objective, transcendental truth. If there's no truth, there's no moral intuition. You don't have anything to guess or to understand or to discover. Louise Perry says, I can't claim to offer a neat answer, only to say that there clearly is such a thing as a moral intuition. The complaint that I have against liberal feminism, and sometimes against liberalism too, is that there is a suspicion of moral intuition within the ideology, a feeling that it's incumbent on rational people to resist their moral intuition, and actually to suppress it. And okay, there are problems with this concept of a secular moral intuition, but what she's saying here is absolutely correct, because the radical liberal ideology is not only counterproductive, as we know the sexual revolution has backfired in 100 spectacular ways, but it's also driven by principles and ideas that are profoundly wrong, that are against what is good, that will never bring real happiness, and that we as Christians need to fight with ever greater determination. These, in short, were my thoughts and comments about this book. Very interesting book. You might find many interviews on YouTube with the author about the book and about these topics. So I encourage you to watch them if you're interested in this topic. And thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all. Bye.